I'm just gonna do one last one since I'm here. I might do Eloise and Hildegard together. So hi, welcome back to the archive. I'm still sharing warriors, queens, and intellectuals. And so this time we're gonna talk about Eloise. Eloise embraces a new philosophy. And so in Paris, let's say it's right now, it's 11:15 in world year 11:15. Paris is intellectually lit. A lot of intellectuals are there. Eloise was born in 1090, and she was, I'm not sure she was an orphan because it says that Fulbright, so Fulbert, was a church official and he was her guardian. So her guardian was her uncle. And again, going back to this theme of like these women being really respected by the men in their lives, he loved that she was educated. He sent her off to school at a convent. And when she came back, she was just so knowledgeable. She was so smart. He loved it. And she wanted to be fed more knowledge. And he was like, I will do that. Let me find the best teacher in Europe to teach you to be your tutor. And so Fulbert basically commissioned one of the best teachers in Paris at the time, not knowing that this teacher, who's already 36 years old, Eloise was 17 at this time. So Peter Abelard, Peter Abelard was one of the most notorious teachers at the time. He was controversial. He was super smart. But apparently he had already caught wind of Eloise and really liked her. And he was scheming to have her uncle to have him tutor her. So while her uncle was looking just like innocently for somebody to teach his niece, he was already being a predator. Okay, so this teacher, he's really good. He's like he wrote his autobiography later called The History of My Misfortunes, and he was a student. He was a teacher. The students learned from him. Um, it talked about the different tiers of education at the time. So first they would learn, students would be taught logic, grammar, and rhetoric, so like how to present a clear argument. Then they would move on to the next level where they would learn the quadrillium. Quadrillium was geometry, arithmetic, astronomy, and music, which included math in there. And then they moved on to advanced studies, which was like theology, law, and medicine. So Abelard was good at everything but math. He was really interested in the mysteries of the universe, and so he wanted to put his language, linguistic skills, the dialectic, in conversation with like the philosophy. So this is the beginning of philosophy known as scholasticism. And scholasticism basically is using reason to understand everything, is what Joyce said. And so, Abelard, also brought through a different philosophical style, which was called disputing, which basically he would pose a problem to his students and then they would assess the problem from all different sides. I tried this in my PhD dissertation as a method, and it didn't go well, right? Because again, why are you defending racism, for instance, when you're looking at all different sides? So slippery slope, highly would not recommend that form of philosophy because again, I dabbled into it and it got me into a lot of trouble, right? It's a slippery slope because if you're for this, you can't be for this. Like, pick a side, right? While two things could be true at once. Basically, disputing was Abelard's kind of thing. You pose a problem and you attack it from all sides. He made a lot of enemies doing this. He made a lot of enemies. People were really jealous. He made people look really foolish in public. So everybody he made look foolish wanted revenge. They didn't like him, right? Because no one likes to look foolish. And so, but he was really smart. He was like a know-it-all. People didn't like it. So it made him a lot of enemies because he basically would find a way to just like refute their arguments and add brilliance to it. And like he was making people look bad. So he got a lot of enemies. He also wrote a book called Yes and No, which writes down all the contradictions in the Bible. I didn't even know this. I've always thought, I always wondered if there's a book like that. There is a book like that. Um, Abelard wrote one. It's called Yes and No. And it writes down all the contradictions in the Bible. Again, people didn't like this because they thought he was being arrogant and showing God off, trying to like one up God, right? But some of his other philosophers at the time was Thomas Aquinas. Um, Abelard's thoughts made him many enemies. They hated that, I already said that, they hated that he made them feel foolish, right? So anyways, he already knew about Eloise and was scheming to tutor her. So when when her uncle was like, please teach my daughter, he was like, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. And apparently he sometimes would strike her, like he would beat her. Apparently that was like a romantic thing because he loved her so much he had to make people think that like they weren't in love, and so he would like beat her. Strange. Eventually she became pregnant, right? She became pregnant. Everybody knew that they were together but her uncle. Her uncle was like in the dark. It was like, oh no, he's just her tutor. And people were like, no, those two were bumping skins. Like they are getting it in. So he kidnapped her. He took her to Brittany. Abelard, the teacher, kidnapped his student, took her to Brittany, France, where his sister lived, where she had the baby. Her uncle found out, came and was pissed. Her uncle was so mad, and was like, "You guys need to get married. You are bringing shame and dishonor to the family." Um, Abelard was like, "Okay, fine, I'll marry her in secret," which her uncle's like, "That doesn't do anything for me. I need you to be married publicly." Eloise actually was the one that made an argument against marriage. She's like, "I don't want to marry this man." And then she used her wit and intelligence to basically be like, here's why we shouldn't marry. And she said, getting married is not great for an intellectual because now it's going to distract you. Pursuit of children and family would interfere with his studies and his intellectual pursuit. This is not good for you. Don't marry me. Make me a mistress. This is what she said. I would rather be a mistress. You just do your thing. And he was like, no, I want to marry you. And she was like, well, I'm not going to stop you, but I'm letting you know if you marry me, the both of us are going to suffer from here on in. As much as we've loved each other, we're gonna feel the anguish and the suffering just as much as our love. And he was like, no, whatever, I'm gonna marry you. So they left the baby with his sister. They went back to Paris, and basically, so said, so done. It was prophetic. They just both suffered. When they returned to Paris, they were separated. They would only meet together in secret to have sex. Fulbert was telling people they're married. Like her uncle was like trying to save it and be like they're married. She lied and said they weren't married, which pissed her uncle off. So then her uncle beat her because her uncle's like, why are you telling people you aren't married? You're married. And she's like, I don't want people to know I'm married. So her uncle beat her, and her husband came back to save the day and be like, stop beating her. He took her to a convent. Then her uncle or somebody allegedly, Abelard in the at night, people broke into his house and castrated him. So they just chopped him right off, and it was like a huge scandal. Everybody was like, "Oh my God, what is happening?" Um, so basically, yeah, her husband was castrated. She couldn't have sex with him. She was put in a convent. He went off to a monastery himself. Years later, her convent was getting evicted, so he showed up and saved her and not rekindled them. She started at first wanting to be like, we should finish off where we started. Even though I can't have you physically, I still love you. I just want to hear, I just need a validation, to hear you say that you love me. And he was like, no, girl. He called her sister in Christ. So basically, he friend zoned her and was like, we are just siblings in Christ. We can't go down that road anymore. And they shared correspondence with each other, which is just all intellectual. And so we have these like, documented accounts of like philosophy. They would really just basically like shoot the shit and talk about physics and stuff. And that's how they kept it until they both died. And when they were both died, they were both buried next to each other. And so their romance was actually more at the end of the life where they wrote story to each other, even though they weren't together romantically. But apparently, it's a test. It's a love story where they really loved each other. And again, what? So that's Eloise. Basically, she introduces a new form of philosophy. And then there's Hildegard von Bingen. At 38 years old, she was a nun in Germany. She was really good at sciences. She used to have visions. And she would get headaches and visions, but her visions she wrote down into a book, which were really prophetic. She was the youngest of 10. They were aristocratic. Um, and she would, like I said, she would write down her recorded visions, and she wrote a book, uh, Scito Vias Domini, The Ways of the Lord. So basically, she wrote a book. She was able to get permission from Pope Eugenius, which gave her a lot of authority. But she's mostly known for a lot of the letters she wrote. She wrote a lot of influential people, popes, kings, emperors, even Eleanor. She wrote to Eleanor. Eleanor was a scandalous one who was an incestuous relationship with her uncle, who gave birth to Marie. And so Hildegard was best known. She also wrote Physica, which is a book of simple science. She noted down, and then she wrote another book called Cause and Curses. It's a book of compound medicine. She used foods and herbs for medicinal information. She started studying Greco-Roman Dr. Galen, and at that time, medicine at that time before it was debunked was like illness is from imbalance in the body, right? So this was the school of thought she came from, was that illness starts as an imbalance in the body, which sounds very much like Ayurvedic medicine, which sounds very much like traditional Chinese medicine, African cosmologies, indigenous worldviews, right? Later, of course, science, Western medicine debunked it and said like that's not it. But her thing again is very much taken from India and Ayurvedic medicine, where it's like blood is hot, wet, yellow bile, which is like fire, which is hot and dry, phlegm, which is water, which is wet and cold, and black bile. So health science was basically broken down into those four categories. That was a field of thought. This is when lobotomies were like seen as good, so people would be bleeding patients out, especially women after menopause. A lot of women would get bled out to have lobotomies. This was seen as balancing, right? You have too much blood, we need to drain you of your blood. And it was seen at that time that like people should be bled out like 3 times a year, depending on the change of the seasons. So this is kind of what she was known for. She was a surgeon. She would do extractions. She would mend wounds. She was also did apothecary, which is like the medicinal herbs and using. She had a garden. She knew about different herbs and their cures for plant medicine. And then she was also a midwife. And so she was a trained in childbirth and women's issues. She did this informally, but again, Hildegard is basically known as one of those modern women, not modern women, ancient women who really wanted us to pay attention to women in science, the role of women, right? And we see that today. She was saying there's a difference between men and women biologically in terms of how, you know, different symptoms and stuff. And even now, we're seeing now where they're like, oh yeah, the symptoms for a heart attack in a man is different from in a woman, and so on and so forth. Again, gender essentialism is a little bit weird and it's a slippery slope itself, but that's what she was known for. And she also was known for telling people what gender they were having. So she was doing gender reveals before gender reveals were a thing. But her old school way was like, if a couple is truly in love, then they're gonna have a virtuous son. If the semen is strong but the woman doesn't love the man, then they're gonna have a non-virtuous boy, a son. If the semen is thin, but they love each other, then they're going to have a virtuous girl. If the semen is thick, but the semen is strong and they like each other, then they might have a bitter child. Like it was just basically to her, you could tell a gender of a baby by the psychological state of the parents during intercourse. Do the parents like each other during intercourse? Is the semen strong or weak? That is to her what determined what sex the baby was. Obviously, that didn't really go very far. But yeah, she lived until she was 81. She preached in churches, which was very rare at that time, even still now, right? You don't see a lot of women preaching within, I think, I don't know if it's a Catholic church, but it was unheard of for women to do that. We no longer see medicine the Galen way, and so obviously it was debunked, but she was ahead of her time, right? And she really wanted women to be considered in medicine. So that's what she's known for. So, yeah. Razia. Razia's next. Razia, we're going to get into the Muslims in India. Razia's role in India. I'm going to do that next time. Okay? So, those are some of the women I've been learning about here before the 1400s. Um, Very interesting, very interesting. Have you heard of these women? I've heard of Hildegard before. Um, I did not know about Eleanor. I did not know about Marie of Champagne. I did not know. I knew about Aisha. Radegund, I didn't know about. Again, a lot of these so far are women based in Europe. There is a few that's coming out of China. Zhu Zetian. I have to do so. Kahina defends North Africa against Muslims. So there are more. We're gonna get into more in a little bit. So maybe the next one I'll talk about the women of color. We'll do. I'm gonna do an Aisha again when I find the notes from Aisha. But yeah, maybe the next one we'll do some of the other girls, some of the other women. But yeah, until next time, in solidarity.